Have you ever prayed the Rosary and felt like your words were lost in the void? Have you ever wondered why some faithful experience apparitions and miracles while you only find silence? An exorcist priest with over 20 years of experience confronting the forces of evil has just revealed a secret that could transform your prayer life forever. What you are about to hear is not religious theory, but pure experience, lived on the most intense spiritual battlefields imaginable. Father Lorenzo Mendoza never imagined that his ministry as an exorcist would lead him to discover one of the deepest mysteries of Marian devotion. For decades, he had observed something extraordinary: the people who achieved the deepest deliverances, those who experienced the real presence of the Virgin Mary during their prayers, had something in common that took him years to decipher. It wasn't their fervor, it wasn't their holiness, it was something much simpler and at the same time revolutionary. It all began one October morning, when Father Lorenzo received a desperate call. Elena, a 42-year-old woman from Guadalajara, had been experiencing inexplicable phenomena in her home for months: objects moving on their own, whispers in unknown languages, and a spiritual oppression so intense that she had stopped sleeping. She had visited several priests, intensified her prayers, but nothing seemed to work. The illness had trapped her in a web of despair that grew stronger every day. When Father Lorenzo arrived at her home that first afternoon, he found a broken woman. Elena tearfully told him that she prayed the Rosary 3 times a day, that she had placed images of the Virgin in every room, that she fasted and did penance, but the torment did not cease. Her young children had begun to have nightmares, her husband was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and she felt completely abandoned by heaven. "Father," she said in a trembling voice, "I pray and pray, but I feel that the Virgin does not hear me. Why doesn't she come to help me?" That night, as Father Lorenzo prepared the liberation ritual, something extraordinary happened. It hadn't been planned, it wasn't in any liturgical manual, but a deep inspiration moved him to do something different. Instead of immediately beginning the exorcism prayers, he turned to Elena and asked her a question that would change everything. "Elena, I want you to pray the Rosary with me tonight, but not now. We'll wait until the clock strikes exactly 3 in the morning. Trust me." Elena looked at him in bewilderment. 3 in the morning? Why such a strange hour? She had prayed the Rosary in the mornings while preparing breakfast, in the afternoons while the children played, at night before bed, but she had never considered that the hour might have any special significance. Father Lorenzo didn't explain much to her that first night. He only asked her to trust and be ready for something that might surprise her. When the clock hands aligned at 3 o'clock, something in the atmosphere of the house instantly changed. The air thickened, not oppressively but expectantly, as if heaven itself were leaning down to listen. Elena began to pray the first joyful mystery, with a voice that trembled with nervousness. But as the Hail Marys flowed from her lips, her voice grew stronger, filled with a peace she hadn't experienced in months. Upon reaching the third mystery, the unthinkable happened. A soft fragrance of roses filled the room, even though there were no flowers in the house. Elena felt a maternal presence so real, so tangible, that she opened her eyes expecting to see someone standing before her. She saw no visible apparition, but what she experienced was even more powerful. She felt the invisible arms of a loving mother surrounding her, comforting her, protecting her. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. But this time they were not tears of despair, but of a relief so profound that it seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Father Lorenzo watched silently, but he too was experiencing something extraordinary. During his years as an exorcist, he had developed a special sensitivity to spiritual presences, both dark and light. That morning, as Elena prayed the Rosary at 3 o'clock, she could feel the demonic forces that had been tormenting this family simply vanish, like shadows fleeing before the light of dawn. When Elena finished the last glorious mystery, the transformation was evident. Her face had changed completely, radiating a serenity she hadn't shown in months. Her hands, which had once trembled constantly with anxiety, now rested peacefully on the Rosary. "Father," she whispered, "she was here. I didn't see her with my eyes, but I felt her with all my heart. The Virgin Mary was here with me." That experience marked a turning point in Father Lorenzo's ministry. He began to wonder if he had been overlooking something fundamental in his understanding of the Rosary. Over the next few weeks, he researched intensively, consulted mystical texts, spoke with other experienced exorcists, and above all began to observe patterns in the experiences of people who had genuine encounters with the Virgin Mary. What he discovered astonished him. The most famous Marian apparitions in history had something in common that few had noticed. They all occurred at specific times that followed a celestial pattern. Fatima, Lourdes, Guadalupe, La Salette, each of these sacred manifestations had taken place at times of day that were not random, but rather followed a profound spiritual logic that he was beginning to decipher. Father Lorenzo began experimenting with different people who came to him seeking spiritual help. He asked some to pray the Rosary at noon, others at dawn, and others at midnight. The results were so consistent that they surprised even him. People who prayed at specific times reported profound mystical experiences, while those who prayed at random times, albeit with the same devotion, did not experience the same level of spiritual connection. It was during this period of research that she met Maria Carmen, a 78-year-old woman who lived alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of Puebla. Maria Carmen had been devoted to the Rosary for over 50 years, but had never experienced anything out of the ordinary in her prayers. She was a simple woman who had worked all her life as a seamstress and found in the Rosary her only solace after losing her husband and 2 children in a car accident years before. When Maria Carmen contacted Father Lorenzo, it wasn't because she was being tormented by demonic forces, but because she felt spiritually dry, as if her 50 years of prayer had been in vain. "Father," she confessed during their first phone conversation, "I've prayed more rosaries than I can count, but I feel like my words have never reached heaven. I'm tired of talking to myself. Does God really hear me?" The vulnerability in Maria Carmen's voice deeply moved Father Lorenzo. Here was a woman who had remained faithful through decades of pain and loneliness, yet had never experienced the mystical consolation she so longed for. He decided to apply to her what he had been learning about sacred hours of prayer. "Maria Carmen," he told her during their first visit, "I want you to do something different this week. Instead of praying the Rosary whenever you feel like it or when you have free time, I want you to choose a specific time and commit to praying at exactly that time every day. But not just any time. I want you to pray at 6 in the morning, just as the sun is beginning to rise." Maria Carmen accepted the challenge, although she didn't fully understand the reasoning behind the priest's request. For 50 years, she had prayed whenever it was convenient for her, usually while cooking, cleaning, or before going to sleep. The idea of waking up specifically to pray at 6 in the morning seemed strange to her, but something in Father Lorenzo's conviction motivated her to try. The first morning was difficult. Maria Carmen hadn't gotten up early in years, and her body protested when the alarm clock rang at 5:45. She got up with difficulty, went to her small living room where she had a makeshift altar with an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, and began to pray as the first rays of sunlight filtered timidly through her window. The first few days she didn't feel anything different. Her prayers seemed the same as always, mechanical, repetitive, without any special spark. But Maria Carmen was a woman of her word, and she had promised Father Lorenzo that she would try for a full week. So she continued getting up every morning, continued praying as the world woke up around her, continued fulfilling her commitment despite not feeling any apparent change. It was on the 5th morning that something happened that would change her life forever. Maria Carmen was praying the 4th joyful mystery, the presentation of the child Jesus in the temple, when she suddenly felt her small living room fill with a presence so powerful that she had to open her eyes to make sure she was alone. No one was physically present, but the feeling of company was so real that she could have sworn someone was sitting next to her. As she continued praying, she began to experience something completely new in her 50 years of praying the Rosary. The words that had been mechanically repeated for decades suddenly came alive, as if she were hearing them for the first time. "Hail Mary, full of grace." But this time she could truly feel the grace the prayer spoke of. "The Lord is with you." And for the first time in years, Maria Carmen truly felt that the Lord was with her as well. Tears began to roll down her wrinkled cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness like the ones she had shed during so many years of mourning. These tears were different. They were tears of recognition, of finding oneself, of a loneliness that finally found companionship. As she prayed, "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners," she could truly feel that Mother interceding for her, embracing her spiritually, consoling the heart that had been broken for so long. When she finished the Rosary that morning, Maria Carmen sat in silence for almost another hour, simply absorbing what she had experienced. She hadn't seen any apparitions, she hadn't heard any audible voices, but she had experienced something deeper than any outward manifestation. She had felt Mary's maternal love in such a real and tangible way that her life would never be the same. Father Lorenzo couldn't contain his excitement when Maria Carmen called him that same afternoon to tell him what had happened. Her voice had changed completely. It no longer sounded like that of a woman tired and defeated by life, but like that of someone who had found a renewed reason to live. "Father," she said with a voice full of joy, "I waited for this moment for 50 years. I prayed for 50 years, hoping someone would listen to me. And this morning I discovered that not only did they listen, but they had been waiting for me all these years." This case confirmed Father Lorenzo's suspicions about the importance of specific times in praying the Rosary. But his research was just beginning. Over the next few months, he began meticulously documenting the experiences of dozens of people who followed his instructions to pray at specific times. The patterns that emerged surprised even him. He discovered that the most powerful times for praying the Rosary were not random, but corresponded to specific moments in the daily cycle that held deep spiritual significance. 3 in the morning, the time Jesus is traditionally believed to have died on the cross, proved to be particularly powerful for cases of spiritual deliverance. 6 in the morning, the time of dawn when light overcomes darkness, seemed to be ideal for people seeking spiritual renewal and emotional healing. Midday, when the sun is at its highest point and shadows are shortest, proved effective for people who needed clarity in important decisions or who were experiencing periods of spiritual confusion. 6 o'clock in the evening, the traditional time of the Angelus, when the Church commemorates the Annunciation, proved especially fruitful for mothers and women seeking Mary's intercession in family matters. But perhaps Father Lorenzo's most surprising discovery was around midnight. This hour, which marks the transition from one day to the next, seemed to be particularly favorable for people experiencing important life transitions, widows needing to learn to live alone, young people discerning their vocation, people facing serious illnesses, or anyone moving from one stage of life to another. These discoveries led him to develop what he began to call the celestial map of prayer, a system that correlated people's specific spiritual needs with the most auspicious times to experience the presence of the Virgin Mary through the Rosary. It wasn't magic, it wasn't superstition, it was simply recognizing that heaven has its own rhythm, and that when we align ourselves with that rhythm, our prayers reach a depth and effectiveness that would otherwise be impossible. Father Lorenzo's fame began to spread quietly among Catholic circles in Mexico and beyond. People traveled from distant states to consult him, not only those in need of exorcisms, but also ordinary devotees, longing to experience a deeper connection with the Virgin Mary through the Rosary. The priest found himself in the unique position of being both a spiritual warrior battling demonic forces and a mystical guide helping thirsty souls find the oasis of Marian presence. It was during this period that the most challenging and revealing case of his career came to him. Sophia, a 25-year-old woman from Mexico City who had been experiencing not only demonic attacks, but also what appeared to be false Marian apparitions. Sophia had begun having visions of a female figure claiming to be the Virgin Mary, but these apparitions left her agitated, confused, and spiritually unsettled rather than filling her with peace. When Father Lorenzo investigated the case further, he discovered that Sophia had been compulsively praying the Rosary at all hours of the day and night, especially during the periods when she felt most spiritually attacked. Her devotion was genuine, but her chaotic approach to prayer had created a vulnerability that dark forces were exploiting to sow confusion in her spiritual life. "Sophia," Father Lorenzo explained to her during their first spiritual direction session, "the enemy not only hates our prayers, he also knows how to corrupt them when we don't pray them with the order and discipline that God expects of us. You have been praying in panic, not faith. You have been shouting at heaven instead of whispering with confidence. The Virgin Mary does not come in chaos, she comes in peace." The treatment Father Lorenzo prescribed for Sophia was radical in its simplicity. Instead of praying constantly as she had been doing, he asked her to choose a single time of day to pray the Rosary. 9 o'clock at night, the time monks traditionally pray Compline, the last prayer of the day before nighttime rest. He strictly forbade her from praying the Rosary at any other time, no matter how spiritually attacked she felt. The first few days were difficult for Sophia. She was used to using the Rosary as a kind of panic shield, clinging to it whenever she felt the presence of evil. But Father Lorenzo had explained to her that this reactive approach to prayer kept her in a constant state of spiritual warfare, instead of leading her to the peace that true prayer should produce. The discipline of praying alone at 9 o'clock at night initially increased Sophia's anxiety, but Father Lorenzo assured her that this was temporary. "The enemy is furious," he explained, "because you are moving from chaos to order, from reaction to action, from fear to faith. Stay firm in the discipline and you will see the fruits." The transformation began to manifest during the second week. Sophie noticed that the false apparitions, which had been occurring sporadically throughout the day, began to decrease in frequency and intensity. Her 9:01 p.m. prayer time became an oasis of calm amid days that had previously been filled with spiritual turbulence. But what was most significant was what began to happen during that sacred hour she had established. During the third week of following the new discipline, while Sophia was praying the sorrowful mysteries at 9 o'clock at night, she experienced something completely different from the false apparitions she had been experiencing. She saw no figure, heard no voice, but she felt a presence so maternal, so loving, and so peaceable that she instinctively knew this time it was real. The difference was like that between a flickering artificial light and the gentle light of dawn. The false apparitions had been dramatic but unsettling, filled with urgent messages and demands for immediate action. This real presence of the Virgin Mary was completely different, silent, patient, filled with a love so profound that Sophia felt like a little girl being comforted by her mother after a terrible nightmare. That night, for the first time in months, Sophia slept soundly and uninterruptedly. The spiritual attacks that had been tormenting her vanished like morning mist. The false apparitions ceased completely. Her prayer life, which had been characterized by panic and despair, was transformed into a source of strength and serenity. Sophia's case confirmed for Father Lorenzo something he had begun to suspect. The enemy not only fears sincere prayers, he especially fears orderly and disciplined prayers that are said during times heaven has established as particularly sacred. When we pray chaotically, even with good intentions, we create vulnerabilities that can be exploited. But when we pray with order, discipline, and at the appropriate times, we create spiritual strongholds that the forces of evil cannot penetrate. Over the following years, Father Lorenzo systematized his discoveries into what is now known among his followers as the Marian Hours. It is not a rigid or legalistic system, but rather a flexible guide that helps people find the time of day when their soul is most receptive to the presence of the Virgin Mary. Some find their sacred hour at dawn, others at dusk, and still others at midnight. The important thing is not the specific hour, but the commitment to keeping that hour sacred as a daily appointment with heaven. Testimonies began to pour in from all over the Spanish-speaking world. Letters from people who had followed Father Lorenzo's teachings and experienced profound transformations in their prayer lives. Mothers who had found peace in the midst of family crises. Young people who had received clarity about their vocation. Sick people who had found strength to endure their suffering. And people who had simply been searching for a deeper connection with heaven and had found it. One of the most moving letters came from a woman named Esperanza from Bogotá, Colombia. Esperanza had been a devotee of the Rosary for 30 years, but had never experienced anything extraordinary in her prayers. After reading about Father Lorenzo's teachings, she decided to commit to praying the Rosary every day at exactly 5 in the afternoon, without exception. During the first month, she didn't notice any significant changes, but she persisted because something in the priest's teachings had resonated deeply in her heart. It was during the second month that she began to notice subtle changes. Her prayer time became the most anticipated moment of her day, an oasis of calm in the midst of her busy life as a single mother of 3. By the third month, Esperanza began experiencing what she could only describe as silent conversations during her rosary time. She didn't hear any audible voices, but she felt answers to the concerns she carried in her heart. When she prayed for her children, she felt a maternal assurance that reassured her about their future. When she prayed about their financial difficulties, she received practical insights on how to better manage their resources. The most beautiful thing of all was that Esperanza began to feel that she was not raising her children alone. During her sacred hour of prayer, she experienced the presence of a heavenly mother who shared the burden of motherhood with her. "It is as if the Virgin Mary had adopted me as her daughter," she wrote in her letter to Father Lorenzo, And now I feel that my children are her children too. I'm no longer afraid of the future, because I know I am not alone. These experiences led Father Lorenzo to an even deeper understanding of why certain hours are more conducive to encounters with the divine. It's not that God or the Virgin Mary are only available at certain times, but that our human hearts have natural rhythms that make us more receptive to grace at certain times of the day. God is always speaking, Father Lorenzo explains to those who seek his advice, but we are not always in a position to listen. There are times of the day when our defenses are lowered, when our worldly concerns are quieter, when our hearts are more open. These are the moments we should take advantage of for deep prayer. Dawn, for example, is a time when our minds are not yet fully awake to the day's worries. There is a morning innocence that makes us more receptive to the sacred. Dusk, on the other hand, is a time of natural reflection when the day is ending and the soul prepares for rest. Midnight is an hour of profound silence when the world is asleep and only the soul and God remain. But Father Lorenzo's most revolutionary discovery came around 3 a.m., the time he had used with Elena in his first documented case. This time, traditionally known as the Hour of Mercy, because it is believed to be when Jesus died on the cross, turned out to be extraordinarily powerful for cases of spiritual liberation and profound healing. 3 in the morning, Father Lorenzo explains, is when the veil between heaven and earth is thinnest. It is the hour when Jesus surrendered his spirit to the Father, the hour when the greatest act of love in human history was consummated. When we pray at this hour, we are mystically united to that supreme moment of redemption. During his years of research, Father Lorenzo documented hundreds of cases of people who experienced physical healings, spiritual liberations, and profound conversions while praying the Rosary at 3 a.m. He doesn't recommend this time of day for everyone, as it requires special commitment and discipline, but for those experiencing severe spiritual crises or seeking a radical transformation in their lives, it has proven to be extraordinarily effective. One of the most dramatic cases was that of Roberto, a 50-year-old man from Monterrey who had been struggling with alcohol addiction for more than 20 years. Roberto had tried everything: medical treatments, psychological therapy, support groups, and multiple attempts at detoxification. Nothing had worked permanently. He always relapsed, often in ways more destructive than before. When Roberto came to Father Lorenzo, it wasn't so much because he believed prayer could help him, but because it was his last resort before considering suicide. His marriage was over, he had lost his job, and his adult children no longer wanted to have any contact with him. He was at the absolute depths of human despair. Father Lorenzo, after hearing Roberto's story, made him a proposal that at first seemed absurd. "Roberto," he said, "I want you to, for the next 40 days without exception, get up at 3 a.m. and pray the entire Rosary. It doesn't matter how you feel, it doesn't matter if you've been drinking the night before, it doesn't matter anything else. At 3:00 sharp, stand up, Rosary in hand." Roberto protested that he didn't know how to pray the Rosary, that he hadn't been religious since his youth, that he didn't believe it would work. Father Lorenzo responded with a smile. "I'm not asking you to believe. I'm asking you to obey. Believe later, if you want. For now, just do what I tell you. Do what I..." The first few nights were torturous for Roberto. He woke up with a hangover, shaking and feeling nauseous. But there was something about Father Lorenzo's spiritual authority that motivated him to persist. Night after night, he would get up at 3, light a small candle in front of an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe that had belonged to his deceased mother, and begin clumsily reciting the prayers he had learned as a child. For the first week, he didn't feel anything special. The prayers seemed mechanical, meaningless, but he continued because he had promised to do so for 40 days. During the second week, he began to notice that those 3 a.m. prayer sessions were becoming the only moments of peace in his chaotic days. He didn't understand why, but there was something about that silent hour that calmed the constant anxiety that had been his companion for years. By the third week, something extraordinary began to happen. Roberto began to look forward to his 3 a.m. prayer time. He found himself going to bed earlier so he could wake up more easily. His alcohol consumption began to decrease naturally, not by willpower, but because something in him no longer desired to be intoxicated during his sacred time of prayer. It was during the 4th week that Roberto experienced what he can only describe as a genuine encounter with the divine. While praying the 4th sorrowful mystery, the crucifixion of Jesus, he suddenly found himself weeping uncontrollably, But they weren't tears of self-pity like the ones he had shed so many times before. These tears came from a deeper place, tears of genuine repentance, of acknowledgement of all the pain he had caused his family and himself. At that moment, Roberto felt a maternal presence so real that he looked around expecting to see someone in the room. No one was physically present, but the feeling of being embraced by a loving mother was so strong that he felt like a small child being comforted after having done something terribly wrong. Without audible words, but with absolute inner clarity, he felt something being said to him. "My son, your heavenly mother never abandoned you. Now allow her to help you up." That early morning marked the turning point in Roberto's life. His addiction didn't disappear instantly, but something fundamental had changed within him. For the first time in decades, he had real hope. More importantly, he had a daily source of spiritual strength that sustained him through times of temptation. Roberto completed his 40 days of prayer at 3 a.m., but he didn't stop there. That sacred hour had become the anchor of his life. 6 months later, he had achieved the longest period of sobriety of his adult life. A year later, he had rebuilt his relationships with his children. 2 years later, he had found a stable job and was helping other men struggling with addiction, sharing with them the secret that had transformed his own life, the power of disciplined prayer during the sacred hour. "The Virgin Mary didn't save me from addiction," Roberto used to tell those who asked him about his transformation. "She taught me to get up every time I fell. She gave me the strength to get up again more than I had fallen. And most of all, she showed me that I was never truly alone in my struggle. Every morning at 3, she was there waiting for me, believing in me when I no longer believed in myself." Roberto's case became one of the most powerful testimonies Father Lorenzo shared with those who doubted the transformative power of praying the Rosary during the sacred hours. But it also taught him something profound about the nature of Marian miracles. The most authentic miracles of the Virgin Mary are not always instant healings or dramatic apparitions, but rather the gradual but permanent transformations that occur when a soul faithfully commits to encountering her at her preferred time. During his years of ministry, Father Lorenzo had observed that the people who experienced the most profound encounters with the Virgin Mary through the Rosary had certain characteristics in common. They were not necessarily the holiest or most devout from the beginning, but rather those who showed a genuine willingness to change their prayer habits, to discipline their spiritual life, and to persevere, even when they felt nothing extraordinary during the first weeks or months. The Virgin Mary, Father Lorenzo reflects, does not come to satisfy our spiritual curiosity or our desire for extraordinary experiences. She comes as a mother who wants to form her children in holiness, and all good formation requires discipline, perseverance, and patience. Those who seek immediate sensations are disappointed, but those who seek authentic transformation find much more than they ever imagined possible. This understanding led Father Lorenzo to develop what he calls the path of silent fidelity, for those who wish to experience the presence of the Virgin Mary through the Rosary. It is not a complicated method, but it requires a commitment that many people in our age of instant gratification find challenging. The first step is choosing the sacred hour. Father Lorenzo guides people to honestly examine their natural life rhythms and identify the time of day when their soul is most receptive, calmest, and most open to contemplation. For some, this is early in the morning before the day's responsibilities catch up with them. For others, it is in the evening when the world has quieted down and they can process the day's events in the presence of God. There's no universally correct time, Father Lorenzo explains, but there is a time that's right for you, and once you find it, you must protect it as if it were the most sacred thing in your life, because it is. It's your daily appointment with heaven, and heaven takes appointments very seriously. The second step is the creation of a sacred space. It doesn't have to be elaborate or expensive, but it should be a specific place reserved exclusively for praying the Rosary during the sacred hour. It can be a private chair, in front of an image of the Virgin Mary, a small altar in a corner of the bedroom, or even an outdoor space if circumstances permit. The important thing is that this space becomes a personal sanctuary, where the soul knows it can encounter the divine. When you have a sacred place and a sacred hour, says Father Lorenzo, your soul begins to anticipate the reunion even before the moment arrives. It's like when you were a child and knew that your parents would arrive home at a certain time. Your heart began to prepare for that reunion before it happened. The same thing happens with disciplined prayer. the soul prepares to receive grace. The third step is unconditional perseverance. This is perhaps the most challenging part of the path, because it requires maintaining commitment even when nothing special feels special, even when life becomes chaotic, even when doubts arise about the effectiveness of the practice. Father Lorenzo has observed that most people abandon the discipline of the sacred hour during the first 2 or 3 weeks, just before the time when the spiritual fruits typically begin to manifest. The enemy of our souls knows the power of disciplined prayer, warns Father Lorenzo, and will do everything possible to disrupt the formation of this sacred habit. He will send distractions, minor illnesses, family emergencies, anything to prevent you from keeping your appointment with heaven. But if you persevere through these initial trials, you will discover that you have built a spiritual fortress that nothing can destroy. During his years of research and ministry, Father Lorenzo also discovered something fascinating about the different types of mystical experiences people have during their sacred hours of rosary prayer. These experiences vary greatly from person to person, but they follow certain patterns that can help others recognize when they are experiencing a genuine encounter with the Virgin Mary. Some people experience what he calls silent presence, a profound sense of not being alone during prayer, accompanied by an inexplicable peace that persists long after the prayer has ended. This is perhaps the most common form of Marian encounter, and is often underestimated by those who expect more dramatic experiences. Others experience inner clarity. During their sacred hour of prayer, they receive profound insights into their lives, their relationships, or their important decisions. These are not supernatural revelations, but rather a mental and emotional clarity that allows them to view their circumstances from a higher, more loving and wiser perspective. A third type of experience is what Father Lorenzo calls silent healing. Deep emotional wounds, long-held grudges, or past traumas that begin to gradually heal over the weeks and months of disciplined prayer. People don't always notice this healing while it's happening, but one day they realize they no longer feel the pain that had plagued them for years. The Virgin Mary, Father Lorenzo explains, works like any good mother. She often does what we most need without us even realizing she's doing it. While we're asking for one thing, she's healing something completely different, which is the true root of our problems. The fourth type of experience, rarer but profoundly transformative, is what he calls a direct encounter, moments in which the person clearly and distinctly feels the personal presence of the Virgin Mary. This may manifest as a feeling of being embraced by a loving mother, as an extremely gentle inner voice offering comfort or guidance, or as a presence so real that the person looks around expecting to see someone physically present. These direct encounters, Father Lorenzo clarifies, are not the goal of praying the Rosary, but rather a gift that Our Lady sometimes grants to those who have been faithful in small things. We should not pray seeking these experiences, because when we seek them for themselves, they rarely come. They come when we least expect them, when our hearts are completely given over to simply loving and serving without expecting anything in return. One of the most beautiful aspects of Father Lorenzo's ministry has been observing how entire families have been transformed when one of their members adopts the discipline of the sacred hour for the Rosary. He began documenting these cases after noticing a pattern. When a person establishes a faithful practice of praying the Rosary at a specific hour, the positive effects mysteriously extend to their entire family, even to members who are not particularly religious. The case of the Herrera family from Guadalajara perfectly illustrates this phenomenon. Patricia Herrera, a mother of 4 teenage children, had been concerned for years about her family's spiritual drift. Her husband had stopped attending Mass. Her children were showing less and less interest in their Catholic faith, and family tensions had increased significantly in recent years. Patricia had tried multiple strategies to revitalize her family's spiritual life. She had suggested family rosaries that ended in arguments. She had tried to force Mass attendance that resulted in resentment. She had tried to initiate conversations about faith that were met with eye rolls and exasperated sighs. When Patricia heard about Father Lorenzo's teachings through a friend, she was initially skeptical. How could her own personal hour of prayer affect a family that seemed determined to turn away from God? But she was so desperate that she decided to give it a try, if only as a last resort. Patricia chose 5:30 a.m. as her sacred hour, half an hour before she normally got up to prepare the family breakfast. For the first few weeks, no one in her house noticed anything different. She would get up quietly, go to her small oratory in the ironing room, and pray the Rosary while the rest of the family slept. But after a month of faithfulness to her sacred hour, Patricia began to notice subtle changes in the family dynamic. Fights between her teenage children became less frequent and less intense. Her husband, without any apparent explanation, began to show more patience with the children and more affection toward her. Family problems that had previously seemed insoluble began to resolve in unexpected ways. The most surprising thing came 3 months after Patricia had begun her prayer discipline. Her eldest son, Carlos, 17, who had been the most resistant to anything related to religion, one day asked her why she got up so early every morning. When Patricia explained her rosary time to him, Carlos, to her utter astonishment, asked if he could join her sometimes. "I don't know why," Carlos told his mother, "but I feel like something in the house has changed. It's like there's more peace, more love, and I think it has to do with what you're doing in the mornings." Gradually, other family members began to join Patricia during her sacred hour of prayer. Not every day and not all at once, but the small oratory in the ironing room became the spiritual heart of the Herrera family. Her husband began attending Mass again, not because Patricia pressured him, but because he said he felt called to do so. Her other children began to ask questions about the faith they had previously dismissed with disdain. "It's as if Patricia's prayers have created a field of grace around the entire family," Father Lorenzo observed when she told him about the transformation. "When a mother faithfully prays for her family during the hour that the Virgin Mary prefers, those prayers not only ascend to heaven, they also fill the home with a presence that everyone can feel, even if they can't explain it." This phenomenon of family transformation, through the disciplined prayer of one of its members, was repeated in dozens of cases documented by Father Lorenzo. It didn't always follow the same pattern, and it didn't always involve all family members, but there was invariably a positive change in the spiritual atmosphere of the home. The faithful prayer of a single person, Father Lorenzo explains, is like a lamp lit in a dark room. It not only illuminates the place where the person praying is, but its light spreads to every corner, touching everyone living under the same roof. This understanding led Father Lorenzo to develop what he calls the praying mother strategy for families experiencing spiritual crises. Rather than trying to force the entire family to pray together or participate in religious practices that may generate resistance, he guides the mother or the most spiritually motivated family member to establish a deep personal discipline of praying the Rosary at a specific sacred hour. "Don't try to drag your family to heaven," she tells these mothers. "Instead, go to heaven every day at the same time, and from there attract your family." Faithful maternal prayer is more powerful than all the words and arguments in the world. The results of this strategy have been so consistently positive that Father Lorenzo now recommends it as the first course of action for any mother concerned about her family's spiritual life. He doesn't promise immediate or uniform results, but he assures us that a mother who prays faithfully during her sacred hour never prays in vain. One of the most intriguing aspects of Father Lorenzo's research has been discovering how different times of day seem to be most effective for different types of family intentions. Mothers praying for rebellious children or those who have strayed from the faith find the nighttime hours between 9 p.m. and midnight particularly powerful. Those praying for the conversion of their husbands find the dawn hours between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. bear the quickest fruit. Those praying for the healing of family divisions or for reconciliation after conflict find midday especially effective. It's not magic, Father Lorenzo clarifies. It's simply recognizing that just as our bodies have natural rhythms, our souls do as well. And when we align our prayers with these spiritual rhythms, our requests encounter less resistance and greater receptivity in the heart of Mary. During his years of ministry, Father Lorenzo has also observed a fascinating correlation between faithfulness to the sacred hour of prayer and protection against spiritual attacks. People who maintain a strict discipline of praying the Rosary at the same time every day report significantly fewer experiences of demonic oppression, spiritual nightmares, or severe temptations. The enemy, Father Lorenzo explains, hates regular prayer times much more than he hates occasional prayers, no matter how fervent. A person who prays sporadically, even with great devotion, is like a city that sometimes closes its doors and sometimes leaves them open. But a person who prays disciplinedly at the same time every day is like a fortress that never lets its guard down. The enemy knows he can't find a moment of vulnerability, so he eventually looks for easier targets. This understanding has led Father Lorenzo to especially recommend the discipline of the sacred hour for people working in frontline ministries, catechists, Catholic social workers, missionaries, and anyone whose work regularly exposes them to spiritually challenging situations. If your work puts you in regular contact with the forces of darkness, says Father Lorenzo, you need more than occasional prayers to protect yourself. You need spiritual armor that is renewed daily through disciplined encounter with the Virgin Mary during her favorite hour. One of the most powerful testimonies of this spiritual protection came from Sister Guadalupe, a nun who worked at a shelter for women victims of domestic violence in Tijuana. For years, she had struggled with what she described as a constant spiritual oppression that seemed to increase every time she helped a new woman escape an abusive situation. It was as if the evil forces that had been tormenting these women were trying to attack me as well, Sister Guadalupe explained to Father Lorenzo during her first consultation. I had terrible nightmares, unexplained anxiety attacks, and sometimes I felt an evil presence so strong that I was afraid to be alone in my cell. Father Lorenzo prescribed a specific discipline for him, to pray the Rosary every day at exactly 3 a.m., the hour of mercy, asking especially for the protection of the Virgin Mary over his ministry and over all the women he served. The results were dramatic and immediate. Within a week, the nightmares ceased. The anxiety attacks disappeared. More importantly, Sister Guadalupe noticed that her ability to help the women at the shelter had greatly intensified. Where before she had felt spiritually drained after each difficult case, she now felt empowered, as if each encounter with human suffering somehow connected her more deeply to the source of all comfort. It's as if my sacred hour of prayer has created a direct channel between the heart of Mary and my ministry, Sister Guadalupe reflected 6 months later. I no longer feel like I'm fighting the forces of evil alone. I feel like I'm an instrument in Our Lady's hands, and she's the one who's really doing the healing work through me. Sister Guadalupe's case illustrates one of the fundamental principles Father Lorenzo has discovered about the sacred hour of prayer. It not only protects the person praying, but also amplifies their capacity to serve others and to be a channel of grace in the world. When you pray disciplinedly during the hour that the Virgin Mary prefers, Father Lorenzo explains, you don't just receive graces for yourself. You become a reservoir of grace that can be poured out on everyone you meet during the day. It's as if your sacred hour charges your soul with a spiritual energy that can then be transmitted to others through your words, your actions, and even your simple presence. This understanding has led many people to view their sacred hour of prayer not only as a time of personal spiritual nourishment, but as a service they offer to the world. They know that their fidelity to this discipline not only benefits them and their families, but also contributes in a mysterious way to the common good of all humanity. Each rosary prayed faithfully during a sacred hour, Father Lorenzo assures, is like a drop of healing balm poured onto the world's wounds. It may seem small and insignificant, but when millions of people adopt this discipline, the cumulative effect is transformative on a global level. Over the past few years of his research, Father Lorenzo has begun documenting what he calls the Global Marian Network, people from different countries, cultures, and languages who have adopted the discipline of the sacred hour for the prayer of the Rosary and who report similar experiences of encounter with the Virgin Mary, despite never having been in contact with each other. It's as if the Virgin Mary had been waiting for centuries for enough people to discover this secret, Father Lorenzo reflects. Now that more and more of the faithful are praying disciplinedly during the hours she prefers, it's as if an invisible web of prayer and grace is being woven that spans the entire world. Testimonies are now coming in from every continent. Mothers in Africa who wake up at 5 a.m. to pray the Rosary and experience Mary's maternal presence. Young people in Asia who dedicate their lunch break to silent prayer of the Rosary and gain clarity about their vocation. Elderly people in Europe who make 8 p.m. their daily sacred time and find peace in their later years. No matter the culture, no matter the language, no matter the particular circumstances of life, Father Lorenzo observes, when a person faithfully commits to meeting with the Virgin Mary for a specific hour each day, she responds. She always responds. It may not be in the way we expect, it may not be at the time we want, but she always responds. This universality of experience has led Father Lorenzo to believe that we are living in what he calls a new Marian epoch, a time in history when the Virgin Mary is showering special graces on those who seek her with discipline and perseverance. I believe we are in the times she herself prophesied at Fatima, says Father Lorenzo, the times when her Immaculate Heart will triumph in the world, and that triumph will not come through dramatic events or spectacular miracles, but through the silent transformation of millions of hearts one at a time, during the sacred hours of prayer that she has established as particularly conducive to the encounter with the divine. Father Lorenzo's message is both simple and revolutionary. The Virgin Mary is waiting to meet you, not when it's convenient for you, but when she can give you her best. All you need to do is choose a time, make it sacred, and show up faithfully, day after day until the encounter your soul longs for finally happens. It doesn't matter how long it's been since your last sincere prayer, Father Lorenzo assures us. It doesn't matter how spiritually dry you've felt. It doesn't matter how many times you've started and abandoned prayer practices in the past. The Virgin Mary is patiently waiting for you to discover her preferred time, and when you finally find it, you'll discover that she's been waiting there all along. Brothers and sisters who have come this far, who have heard these extraordinary testimonies from Father Lorenzo, and from all the souls who have discovered the secret of the sacred hour, now is your time. Don't let this revelation remain only knowledge. Allow it to become a transformation in your own life. I wholeheartedly invite you to subscribe to our channel, Stories of Our Lady, so you don't miss any testimony of the miracles our Heavenly Mother continues to perform in our time. Every story we share here has been carefully researched, every testimony verified, because we know that in times of such spiritual confusion, you need to hear the truth about the true power of Marian intercession. In the comments, I want you to share something very specific with me and with our entire faith community. What time do you feel your soul is most still, most receptive, most ready to encounter the sacred? It may be dawn when the world is still silent. It may be midday when the sun is at its highest point. It may be midnight when only you and the stars remain. Share your heart hour, because when you write it down, you are making a declaration of intent that heaven hears. I also want you to tell us what country, what city you're writing from. I want us to see together how this global Marian network Father Lorenzo spoke of is forming right here in our YouTube community. Write your location followed by the words, Lista para mi hora sagrado, or ready for my sacred hour. Imagine the beauty of seeing comments from Mexico, Colombia, Spain, Argentina, and the United States, all united by the same longing to encounter our Heavenly Mother. And here comes something very important I want to ask of you as an act of faith. Share this video with 10 people. Don't do it just as a favor to the channel. Do it as an act of spiritual charity. Somewhere in your contact list, there is someone desperate for hope. Someone who has been praying the Rosary feeling empty. Someone who needs to hear that the Virgin Mary has specific times when her maternal heart is most open to encounter. When you share this testimony with 10 people, you are doing what the early Christians did. You are bearing good news that can change lives forever. Perhaps one of those 10 people is the one who most needs to hear about the secret of the sacred hour. Perhaps one of them is going through the same spiritual crisis experienced by Elena, Roberto, Maria Carmen, or any of the souls we have met today. Now I want us to look together toward the future, toward what can happen when you adopt the discipline of the sacred hour in your own life. Visualize yourself a month from now, faithfully rising each day at your chosen hour, feeling your soul gradually transformed. Imagine yourself 6 months from now, experiencing Mary's maternal presence in ways you can't even imagine today. Think of your family, your loved ones being mysteriously touched by the graces that will flow from your fidelity to this sacred discipline. But above all, my sister, my brother, I want you to know that in beginning this practice, you will not be alone. You are joining an invisible multitude of faithful souls around the world who have discovered the same secret, who rise at their sacred hours, who have made their daily encounter with the Virgin Mary the #1 priority of their lives. Every time you take up your rosary during your sacred hour, remember that you are part of something much bigger than yourself. You are part of the plan of salvation that Mary is silently orchestrating in these times. You are part of the response to the tears she shed at Fatima, at La Salette, and in all the places where she has appeared praying for the conversion of the world. Before I finish, I want to leave you with a prayer that Father Lorenzo himself prays every night before going to sleep. a prayer that has transformed the prayer lives of thousands of people. My Mother, Most Holy Virgin, tomorrow when my sacred hour arrives, do not allow me to arrive empty-handed. Prepare my heart during this night's rest, so that when we meet in our special moment, I will be completely available to receive everything you want to give me. May my fidelity to this sacred hour be my way of telling you that I love you, that I trust in you, that I believe you have beautiful things prepared for my life. Protect this discipline that I am beginning. Do not allow the enemy to destroy it, and make each rosary prayed during my sacred hour like a hug I give you from the earth. Amen. May the Virgin Mary, Queen of the Rosary, guide your steps toward your personal sacred hour. May she sustain you on days when discipline is difficult. May she comfort you in moments when you don't feel anything special. And may she reward you with her maternal presence when you least expect it but need it most. Your sacred hour awaits you. The question is not whether the Virgin Mary wants to meet you. She has already said yes from all eternity. The question is whether you are ready to meet her on her terms, in her time, at the hour her immaculate heart has chosen especially for you. So be it. Let your new life of prayer begin. Let your sacred hour begin. Let your daily encounter with the Mother who has never abandoned you and who has been patiently awaiting this moment of your spiritual awakening begin. See you in the next testimony. See you in the comments, but above all, we will meet mystically every day during our sacred hours, united in the same rosary, protected by the same maternal mantle, walking together toward the holiness that Mary desires for each of her children. See you soon, and long live the Virgin Mary.